Hello. Welcome to another episode of Candid Catholic Convos. My name is Rachel Trochet, and if you've been listening to our show for any length of time, you'll know that I am a mom to 3 little boys. My oldest just turned 9, and for fun, I compiled a bunch of video clips of him throughout the years. Seeing those full little cheeks and all that untamed baby hair made me miss the days that he was little, but as the video kept going, and I watched him holding his brothers when they were born, or climbing the monkey bars, or riding a bike without training wheels, all I kept thinking was, wow, what a gift to be able to go on this journey with him through all of these stages of boyhood. He's trading in his race cars for Robux, his stuffed animals for sports, and while on one hand, I'm sad to have to say goodbye to this little boy, I'm excited to get to meet the young man he will become. Parenting oldest children is a wild experiment. The baby doesn't come with an instruction manual, nor are you handed one at each stage of life afterwards, which is why there are so many books and articles and studies on parenting. We're really just flying on a wing and a prayer here. And in a lot of aspects, it gets easier the more kids you have. It's kind of like a sequel to your favorite movie, except the actors' names have changed and they hired a new writer. So when it comes to parenting, I like to look at a bunch of different sources, and together, my husband and I try to implement these in our home. Some work, some don't. Some we tailor to make our own, and others evolve as our kids grow up. But we're about to enter that stage of life where we really start to question and eventually understand who we are and what we're made for. I remember my middle school years having a very lasting effect on the person I am today without me even realizing it. My parents helped me by forming a solid foundation for me to stand on, and I want to do the same thing for my kids. But the world looks a lot different now than it did when I was growing up. And again, there's no instruction manual. Or is there? Bishop Senior recently announced that schools in the Diocese of Harrisburg would be incorporating age-appropriate teachings on theology of the body into their curriculum, starting with the 2025 school year. So today, I'm joined by Mr. Courtney Brown, a father of 8, and executive director of Rua Woods Institute. Rua Woods is one of the many curriculum choices our schools and parents alike have to educate our children in Christian anthropology and what that means for us as humans so that we can help our children form their solid foundation as they grow. Courtney, thank you so much for joining me on Candid Catholic Convos today. I'm really excited to talk to you about this program and how bringing it to the school system is really going to be very impactful for the students at the Diocese of Harrisburg. So thanks for joining me.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here for sure.
So this is kind of the first time you and I are meeting. I know you gave a presentation earlier, but would you mind telling me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana. Went to a small college out in Ohio called Franciscan University of Steubenville. I got my theology degree there and found my calling to be a teacher. So I moved back after my 4 years there and got the degree in theology, moved back and taught high school religion, juniors and sophomores, taught, for 4 years. And then Katrina hit and then became a campus minister at a school that needed to start its campus ministry program that was destroyed by the storm. Was a youth minister for 4 years there and then got a job offer in Cincinnati to work with this company called Rua Woods. And they were looking for a TOB, Theology of the Body, education coordinator. And the sole purpose was to go around and actually teach schools, help schools, institute this beautiful teaching that was written by John Paul II. So that's what I did for 5 years. I started a teen discipleship group called Kenosis with my coworker, and which was dedicated based off of the way JP2 would minister to teens and to his young adults. So kenosis was that Greek word of self-emptying gift. A lot of fruit that came out of that, just with the kids really digesting their meaning, their purpose, drawing close to Christ. And really, they became their own agents of evangelizations in their schools. So it grew, it got pretty big. And then 5 years in, I chased my dream job after I got my master's in theology. But then my dream job was to be a principal at a Catholic high school. Not only did I get a dream job, but I was asked to start a school. So I started a Catholic high school, and it was with a K-8 Regnum Christi school. But we started high school, enjoyed every minute of it. But then being a father of 4, which at the time I was a father of 4, now I'm a father of 8. Beautiful, beautiful family. I just couldn't do it. And then, then I was a K-8 principal for 6 years after that. And then now I'm at Rua Woods as the executive director. So I did a full circle where, and I'll talk a little bit more about the ministry in a little bit. But yeah, so that's what I do as a job. But mainly I'm a husband and I'm a father and a son of God. So that's kind of that's who I am in a nutshell. I enjoy activities. I enjoy sports. I really love to hike. I really love to do like exercise. For a while, I was doing triathlons, tried to go pro. Didn't make it, but that's okay. I was fast, but I wasn't that fast. So I just really enjoy those things. And I know football is a fun sport for me to watch, so I enjoy that. And I know Penn State, and right now I'm in Penn Stateville, which is cool. Even though I saw a lot of Notre Dame shirts at the presentation today too, as well. So
it's a big rivalry.
Yeah. I being from the South, it's SEC country down there, and everything above the Dixie line is North. So this is Big Ten country for sure. So anyhow.
No, I love how everything kind of came full circle for you. And I've talked in other episodes about the difference between what we do versus who we are. So I love that. Yeah, I love that you were able to kind of like feel that call and really see it through. I think that's amazing. And with 8 kids, my goodness, I have 3 and I have my hands full.
Yeah, 3's a lot. I will say that when we had number 3, that's when I felt most overwhelmed as a parent. Now, granted, I was 26 or 27. And you went from man-to-man to zone, and it's not zone against, peewee players. It's zone against, Shaq, Kobe, and LeBron. It's
exactly.
Not, they're...
And that third one just knows. They know which buttons to push.
There are moments when I think back, I was so exhausted. Now it's just perpetual exhaustion, but I was so exhausted. I remember waking up. This is kind of dangerous, but I remember waking up, changing my son. Like I was standing... and he was messy, and I had no recollection of walking into the room. That's like a microcosm of what the experience was. But I will say that when people ask, how do you do that? It's kind of funny. One's a lot. It's a lot. But I will say they do start to do things themselves.
Yes.
Because you move out of. But one of my favorite analogies to give to people is we've had a toddler in our house for the past 15 years. so this, yeah.
You get used to it. After 15 years, you kind of know what you're doing.
In some ways, you do. And then you just get some things that our 3-year-old gets away with. There's just no way that we would have liked this when we had our first Malia. There's just no way.
Yeah.
My wife. It was interesting because when we were our first children, she's such a beautiful soul, and she has such grace. But would stick to routines and was so routine oriented. But if the kid would cry, I'd be well, no, we need to stay back. Let's let her cry through the night. But now if Judah cries, she's oh my gosh, it's what happened? Now I'm the one who's it's gotta cry. So anyway,
I joke with my husband that the parent that I wanted to be with my first child is the parent that I am with my third child.
That's cool.
I had all these aspirations, and now that I've kind of gotten my feet wet a little bit, I'm okay, now I know what to expect.
And I think as a parent too, it's important to realize right out of the gate how much the work that's involved. And Dr. Sodergren, who's one of our clinical psychologists at Rua Woods, he has this statement that he made when he and I did a Q&A together. And at that time we were talking about how to talk to your teens about certain special topics, tough topics. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that he so eloquently stated is when he went to get his particular doctorate, I'm going to be I'm going to know all these things psychologically. I'm going to counsel my kids. This is going to be the perfect kid. And then he said, what I realized is, this is his quote, is it's about minimizing how much you hurt them less. And I was thinking, that's a good point. And it's a recognition that we're not perfect and we always need to draw close to the well. Right, that you mentioned the activity, what you do versus who you are. It's so important to recognize that there is a level of resting with God, and we live in a fast-paced culture, It's not going to change in a sense, like this is our culture. Our task isn't to try to change the culture as much as to allow God's culture to exist in our heart, right? So this idea of resting and being good in the Lord and knowing when you fall short that you can tap back into the grace, which Benedict XVI, I think it's on a book on his sermons on love, talks about how grace is a relationship in the Holy Spirit, right? So that as a parent, you got to tap into that. You got to remember this is an apostolate too. So, and how we're holy as parents is focusing specifically on God's will in our temporal state in life here. Like, so, yeah, like Mass looks different for me right now. Like, sitting with my 7-year-old that has sensory issues, ADHD, a little bit of ODD and those kinds of things. And whether or not that's learned behavior or not, we're still trying to figure all that out. But Mass looks way different for me than when I was 19 years old and in all this like beautiful moments of chewing on the gospel. So a lot of that, I have to do that outside, but meaning like outside before Mass to get prepared. But I've now spent time with my 7-year-old and it's been quite a blessing. I know that there's worship of God's community and things like that, and there may be other means, but right now I've spent, every time I go with him, I print out activities, I sit, I talk to him, I slowly bring him to, and it's been great. It's like one of those things where he and I are tapping in a different way. Obviously, that's not the worship that I want him to be doing, but we're talking about a 7-year-old that has some sensory stuff, and we need to get him to a spot where he can do that. So that right there is God, letting me know at least, what I'm asking of you is to be their father and to be actively present. I don't know if you've thought much about that, but like probably have, how easy it is to get just inundated with all those things you got to do, right? But something recently that dawned on me. I was reading this book, The Relentless Pursuit of Hurry. Is that what it is? So anyways, this pastor wrote this book, but one of the things he was talking about was rest. And we have a God who created us. And when he breathes life into us, as we know, this Rua, this breath of God, that's our starting point, right? We did not ask to be here, like, at all. Like, this is so given to us, this life, right? And God breathed it. And he ordained it. And then we get to participate in that ordination of him creating another life and change the cosmos. This is rad to think about. However, with that breath of God, that when we think about what God has called us to do, in a sense of just being present to him is actually recognizing that he also breathed rest into us. Like we were, like that's this Sabbath, this rest with God. It's not isolated rest. So this is kind of like I've always felt since I started my deep dive into theology of the body and really the work of John Paul II is a kind of like an unrooting the utilitarian nature, the materialistic nature of our culture that's been just embedded in my own heart, and trying to help my kids and help anybody I minister to do the same. So this year I've been really focused on how do I create that rest with God in a Sabbath? How do I bring a Sabbath? So I have ideas and stuff like that. So I've been working on one that fits my life. But we live in a culture that just does not have God at the center. Like I think we have to start recognizing that and be not okay with it, but know that God has placed us in culture and he's placed us in here, and we learn of love and we learn of community. This is how he's teaching us, but it's through him that we're learning that. So that's kind of like this. When I think about the beauty of being a parent, is like, wow, we're participating in that very act with God too. So it's a blessing to hear that you have 3 kids, and it is overwhelming, but it's good.
It's a good overwhelming, yes. And I love what you said about the culture, because I feel like for so long I bought into this idea of hustle culture. Like the more that I did equated to my worth. And as I've gained wisdom as a parent, not gotten older, gained wisdom, I'm learning the same things that you are, is that there is power and rest, and that this responsibility of being a parent is such an awesome gift. And I want to talk a little bit about Rua Woods and how we can participate in that to show our children that they are a gift, and how we can kind of work together with that. So tell me a little bit about the mission of Rua Woods and how it's a partnership.
Yeah, so Rua Woods, our mission is in a way, just to explain it, is like what we want to do is take this anthropological vision that JP2 laid out in the theology of the body and how that applies to a particular state in your life. So like, and I'm saying this broadly speaking, so our psych services takes this teaching of JP2, this vision of the human person, and puts it into the best of psychological practice, like in terms of helping souls and healing them, those that are really struggling, right? And then we also have an arm in our ministry that does it with how do we actually teach kids and how do we help parents teach kids? How do we help teachers teach kids this vision? What does it look like? So Rua, we are a human person ministry that's dedicated to always being present to help us navigate these issues that are going to come up. As a side note, for example, I don't know in 10 years what the new topic that culture's just going to wed on to. I have a hunch, but I could be wrong. 12 years ago, I thought it was gender. Here I was teaching them about sexuality, which was a beautiful thing, but showing how JP2's vision applies to sexuality, not because the broad scope of theology of the body has a lot to do with this God's intention of marriage for the human person. So, like for example, he so eloquently puts it, and he points out in one of his meditations on givenness, he talks about how in creating man and making them man and woman in communion speaks of something of his interior life. That's just absolutely whoa, that your marriage and my marriage and our bodies point to that interior life of God. Oh, now I say that when I was presenting on this, the mind of a teen, the mind of anybody in secular culture is not rooted in even thinking in those terms. So what we need to do in a lot of ways, and what we try to do at Rua, is try to usurp the individualistic thinking. Most people think love exists for how I feel or what I should get out of this. That's a utilitarian lens. JP2, the whole work of love and responsibility is to attack that philosophy. So how do we help? In a certain respect, we have teacher trainings that we do, but it's really to show how to take this teaching and really try to bring a lens into to our students and to people that God, our first principle is not us, and the end principle is not us, it's God. That God, like I said, this is a free gift that he's given to us, and the only response for us to come to know our identity and come to know who we are is being in relationship with him, like being as I tell teachers, is like giving them space and time to meet the person who has given them that dignity. We can tell them that's a seed, but he's the one who waters. So like we need to bring them to the well, right? And then even for us, we want our students, we want anybody to feed off of the overflow of grace. We don't want to be channels. This is coming from the book of Soul of the Apostolate and I want to say St. Bridget, but Soul of the Apostolate, a book that's beautiful. If you ever want to, it's a great book. But it talks about being a reservoir of grace. So now, if you scale back, just kind of thinking deeply about children, how there's concepts in the theology of the body. So there's Christian Anthropology, which is a study of the human person in relation to God. Okay, that's a secular way of describing it. And the reason why I'm saying that is because if you typed it in, Wikipedia is probably going to give you something like that. However, there's these basic precepts of Christian Anthropology. The Imago Dei, create an image and likeness of God. Body, soul, unity. We are our bodies. Like we are our bodies. And they're good. That we're called to love. That our body speaks to love. So for example, that interior life of God, that our bodies actually have a spousal meaning. That means we are meant to be in deep, intimate communion with another. First with God. Hence, that's why he, in that meditation on givenness, such a beautiful, I just saw that. He talks about how that's an entrustment. Your husband's been entrusted to you as a gift from God, and you've been entrusted to him. It's like, thank you. Maybe, wait, not for him. I mean, maybe like that's, you know what I'm saying? Like for me, I'm like, not for my wife. My soul mission is to get her to heaven, so I have to aggravate her. Like, you know, But if you think, okay, now we're talking about kids, where does that start? So we used to teach this thing, I don't know what to call it, so I'm calling it, so if someone's hearing this and they have a better name for it, I'm totally open to it. But I call it a filial progression, so a familial filial relationships, family relationships. So it's a filial identity progression. And what that is at the start of it, is we are at the very core is son and daughter of God, of course, but because we have a male body and a female body, that we're son and daughter. Now, if you think about that for a second, that means our body dictates to us an experience in the divine, and that's important to recognize. So that means, in some capacity, that regardless of you changing your body, and I know that the science behind the DNA, if we try to walk the science line, sometimes it's like, well, as soon as science figures it out or does something differently, your argument falls down. But so the church is its anthropology starts with a creator, whereas secular anthropology starts with yourself. So we're on two different playing fields. Hence the word choice. And when it comes to abortion, you ever notice that I'm for choice? What is going on in that person's mind? They're not even, half the time I would argue that they're not even thinking about what it is. They're just thinking that choice first. But then if you really break down the argument and say well, what is an abortion? What is it? What is it? A friend of mine, when we got to this point, he was like, well, it's when you terminate a pregnancy. Well, what's that? And he's like, well, and then he finally got him to say, well, it's when you take the life of the child. And I was like, no, why is that so hard to say? And it's because you don't want to sound like a monster. Because I know you're not. But it's the same thing here, is that our culture has really raised us to think not in sonship or daughtership terms, but in how I feel about whatever I'm feeling. Okay, so we want to uproot that and continue to celebrate that they're a son and that they're a daughter, right? So then it moves to, because I'm a son, and the beauty of theology of the body and the law of the gift, Gaudium et Spes talks about man can only know himself when he makes a sincere gift of himself. You have to understand the word sincere for JP2 means it's an altruistic sincerity, that there's no intention of any gain of yourself. That's a very John of the Cross kind of thing. Nothing. I want nothing other than to show you what is due you. That is I'm not there. Okay? You know what I mean? You can have conversations with your spouse, and I'm still I still get angry about certain topics that, I see it my way. This is my way. This is but JB, disinterested tenderness, he calls it disinterested sincere gift of self. There's no interest at it other than just you doing that which is good. So when my wife says, I want to hold hands, I'm only holding her hand. Well, it's good for me too, but I'm not holding it because it's good for me. I'm holding her hand because it's something that speaks to her. Or I'm going to give a gift with no question about well, do you like it? I know, and then you ever have that happen at Christmas?
Yes,
I was like, do you like it? And you're like, yeah, I like it. Do you like it? And you're like, well, what part of me is saying I like it? I do that, so don't get me wrong. I'm calling spade a spade here on myself, but that's not disinterested. That's not a disinterested gift, if you will. That doesn't mean what you did is wrong. It just that's the process of that gift. So because we're son and daughter, it means that what the law of the gift means, I'm looking towards the other. In the gift of understanding and knowing who I am, I'm made for another. It moves us into a relation of brother-sister bond, that brother-sister relation. So we're brother and sister. And this is when the high school students, this was one of the things they totally got. When you would say, how are we to treat another? They're like, you got to treat him with respect and dignity. How are we to look at another? It's a different question, right? How are you to see the other person? So I would always challenge them. It's seeing God in the other. And this is how you see him. You see yourself as son, and you see them as son, and you see them as daughter, which means they're your brother, and then they're your sister. And so when I would teach high school students, when we talk about lust, and how lust is a distortion of love, and it's a distortion of the gift of the body, and the gift of anything, right? It could be lust of money or whatever, right? But it really is. I think Christopher West said something, and I'm going to quote him on this, and I think it was him when I heard it from, that in a lot of ways, lust is taking the love out of the sexual desire, And I think that's really so. What I would do is I would talk to my teens, and I would say, okay, would you ever lust after your mom? Oh, that's gross. Stop it. Stop. Yeah,
Right.
Would you? And even things like your sister, and I would. It was intentional, and the girls too, dad, brother. And they would unanimously say no. it was almost ubiquitous. And I'm saying almost because there's always a kid that just wants to be like, whatever.
Yeah.
No, but then I would ask, well, do you find yourself lusting at other women, right? And they would say things like, well, yeah, it's like, why? Well, so what's different about this woman versus that woman? And then I'll never forget this one kid in a presentation was doing when I asked the question. He's like, it's because we know who they are. Like he didn't know I was going to say that. He just said it, and he's right. It's because we know them, and we see them as their filial relationship with us. So that's the movement that needs to happen. So every time you see and you are tempted to do something in your mind or do something disadvantageous, whether it's like, for example, in college, if you're going out with friends and you try to like say yes to this group, but then Edward Sri talks about this in the Men and Women in Mystery of Love. And he talks about like, but then you're holding off. You're invited by this one group who you don't really want to go out with, but you don't want to be by yourself. And you hold off to wait to see this other group. No, that's not good either. Copying homework was one in schools. I talk about that too, because that's seen as an act of virtue, like when you give your friend homework. So that right there is like when you think about it, what you need to pray is you need to pray to see the person as God sees them, and then recognize, call them sister, call them brother. So even though it sounds colloquially a little like you're in the times and you're like, hey bro, there's a beauty to that. There is a certain beauty to that. And there are some people that get mad at you for saying that, and that's something kind of cool to think about too. And then from the brother, sister, if you see in scripture and when it talks about song and songs, my sister, my bride, and what is Tobit? You know the Tobit prayer?
No.
The book of Tobit. This is kind of a tangent, but it's a really good one because it speaks to this next progression. So you have the son, daughter, brother, sister. The book of Tobit is asked to marry. Well, let me step back. Tobias is Tobit. I'm getting the names mixed up. So Tobit is a man, and he goes blind, and so he begs the Lord to, almost in a sense, heal him or take his life, right? And then there's chapter 2 is about this girl Sarah who'd been married 7 times before. So you're familiar with the story?
Vaguely. It's been a long time.
So she's been married 7 times before, and so on the wedding night, it says a demon was in love with her, and the demon's name is Asmodeus. And that's going to come back to why that's important in a second. But the demon would slay the man on the wedding night before they would consummate the marriage. So basically, Tobit calls his son Tobias to go marry. He's next in line, if you will, of his kinswoman. So Tobias has to go on his journey, and he's guided by this Azarias, who's the angel Gabriel, incognito. And in the journey, he tells Tobias, well, actually in chapter 2, Sarah prays a prayer of deliverance to take my life because she feels so much shame. So she had 7 husbands and they all died. But then on the journey, Tobias says, Azarias asks, you're going to be marrying tonight Sarah. And he goes, I heard, wait, that means death. So and then he speaks life about marriage. Azarias speaks life about how Tobias is going to rescue her. And he speaks right to that man's heart. And then Tobias is like, yes, I'll do it. He goes from I'm going to die to I will die. It's like, this is totally, and I don't mean that as a manly thing, but there was something about that that's just like, whoa. So then they go to Ragul, who's the dad of Sarah. They go to present to that I'm here for, and he knows all the Jewish culture, Tobit, but then Ragul is, says something, and then essentially this is what's funny, is Ragul okay, Sarah comes down. The ceremonial was you would present a cup, and if she drank from it, she would say yes to the marriage embrace. She would say yes to marriage. So there was an element of choice. But long story. But the beauty part there is Ragul goes and digs a grave for Tobias. How old? You tell your husband.
Yeah.
The next time a guy comes in to date our daughter, just dig a grave for him. But what he was asked to do was asked to perform a ritual on their wedding night. And Azarias gives him this liturgical thing to take these fish guts, to burn them into incense before you consummate. So what happens is Sarah says yes. Now, there's heroism there. You can only imagine as a woman, if you think about it, right? You can only imagine her yes to death. So Song of Songs is so poetic about the romance and the good, right, and the joy. But JP2 talks about Tobit and Sarah being the death that comes with it, this the suffering, and he ties it to the liturgy because it's JP2. You know, it's like that in itself. And these were called secret letters, which meant that he just didn't make them public because he thought they were too intimate. But when you read them, when we think of the word too intimate, we think of like sexual things. What he means by intimate is really deep. I mean, he ties reading the language of the body and the nuptial meaning of the body to how our expression in the liturgy. So that's what he means by it being too intimate. It's like people, nuptial meaning, they get kind of thrown off. That's not the point. The point is that the unity, the divine intimacy that the Lord actually desires to marry us, as St. Bernard of Clairvaux talks about. It's just deep poetry. Like, it's no different than saying to someone that like when you go up to a little baby and say, I just want to eat you. Like, that's crazy talk when you take it out of context, yes. Right? But everybody knows what you mean by that. So at that context too, so he wakes up and says a prayer, and in the prayer he talks, I take my wife as a noble cause, not out of lust. And Asmodeus is a demon name of lust too. So it's so beautiful. But then he says, my sister and my bride. And he quotes the beginning, you made man and woman. So he brings in the liturgy and he brings in the Old Testament reading along with, and then he performs the ritual, and then Angel Gabriel takes care of the rest. Which also shows us that in our marriage, our task is not to fight the demons. Like, that's not what we're asked to do. We're asked to join the God and let him take care of that. Like, you know what I mean? So, but he says, my sister and my bride. So he quotes Song of Solomon, and JP2 talks about this quite a bit, that it's first sister, then bride. And that's really, and I'm saying this from just as I was saying before, the spousal union means in the beginning in this relationship, I have created a bond that has meant that I want only what is best and what is good for my spouse. And if you're in a relationship, we talk about dating with teens, and if you have teens, and when they become teens and you start talking to them about this, there's only one purpose to date. I mean, I was always going to ask them that, and they give you to get to know them. It's like, you can get to know a lot of people without dating them, And then they finally say, I guess to marriage. It's like, yeah, and any of you ready for that? And they're like, no. It's like, so should you be dating? I'm not going to tell you yes or no. But if you put that in perspective, and I always asked kids when they would ask for dating advice, I'd always frame it in a way, so what is good here? And good meaning for you, for her, for them, for him, for your family, for your friends. So what a lot of teens will do is they'll bypass these two filial progressions, son and daughter, and even that brother-sister bond, they'll bypass that completely and just start acting like spouses. And I don't mean that sexually. I mean they spend all their time together. We don't even spend all our time together with our spouse. You know what I mean? And then they get. My daughter was. I don't want to talk too much about it, but she was dating someone, and the anxiety that she was having towards it. Like, Jason Everett says, "Do you think this is what God's will is for you when it comes to dating?" He's so right. He's so right there. No, of course not. You think he wants you to experience that kind of hurt before you're even having a vow and grace. That sacramental grace where you participate in the divine life of God. Why would you want to do that without that? But it's hard because where teens are, they experience this love, they experience this affection for another, and all that stuff isn't bad, but it needs to be rightly ordered. Mm-hmm. And so the last progression is the fruit of that is motherhood and fatherhood. So when a priest or a religious becomes spouse to the Spirit or spouse to Christ, they are spiritual mother and they are spiritual father. And that's our destiny. Like that's our fruit destiny there, right? So we're all called to be mother and we're all called to be father. And some of us have callings and vocations that allow us to become mentor type fathers and mentor type mothers and stuff. So it's a long-winded way to say when it comes to really rooting your kid in this identity, look at the progression of your kids in life and where they are developmentally, and you'll start to see in the stages of look at this progression. Okay, how do I help my kid be a better son and daughter? Virtue formation. Holiness isn't so much in how reverent they are at Mass, although that's really important. But sub to that is that learning to be faithful to doing small chores. Mm-hmm. That stuff is really, really a part of how how they're holy. Doing their homework is an act of holiness. They think it's prison, but
If you were at my house last night arguing over homework, you would have thought it was prison.
Yeah, how old's your oldest?
My oldest is 8, and then I have a 7-year-old, and well, he'll be 9 next week, and then I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old.
Does he? Is he in third grade?
Third grade.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, third and fourth grade, they start to feel it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they start, especially fourth grade, because then their grade comes.
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, I don't know if it's like that.
No, not yet. Well, I think in fourth grade is when we start like numerical grading, but right now it's like pass or fail, like in progress. This one needs some work.
Tangential, like you really do see, where's test anxiety come from? You're like, it's just, it's hard to frame it. It's like all this test is saying, what you know. Mm-hmm. That's all it's telling me. But it's hard. Kids will be like, we don't even try to make it a big deal. And they'll get like, so my oldest son came home one time and said, he had a 63. He was in high school. And he goes, Dad, okay, before you ask questions and get mad, you could see this number in a different way. So this is where it came back to bite me. And he goes, you could see I got 63% right.
That is something my oldest would say. That is something he would say.
Well, he's still going to summer school, but that's okay. It's like one of those. But anyways, so those are moments too. Those light moments, like him doing the work, even though it's hard. That feeds into when they choose a vocation and it's revealed to them. That's the grit and that's the way of holiness that they grow into when their vocation asks of something even harder of them. Mm-hmm. So these are the moments that we're preparing them for life, right? So that's, and I know that doesn't sound like, how do you take these concepts specifically? That one was just in reference to trying to attack what is really the agent that causes a lot of our problems is this hyper-individualistic, and I was talking about rest before, fast-paced society where we're not being present to the one who has given us this dignity. So it's like we're telling them, but they're not really stopping to let that in. So we want to create those moments to help them do that, and have those conversations. So when bigger questions come up, so like whether it's gender, sexuality, that you've fostered conversations enough to where you can have those with them, and it's a continual conversation. That's so important to emphasize. So my wife has took up knitting, and sometimes it's knitting, and it's not. And there's all these different type of fiber arts. I'm learning this now, but she sits on our living room couch or fireplace couch, not couch but chair, and kids come and talk to her. Like it's a very human activity, and they just come and talk to her. She's established with a hobby a way to talk to her kid. It's beautiful. It's beautiful to watch, And now I'm like, man, I got to do something, but I have a hard time sitting down. So once I sit down, my kids say, "You always pass out." I was like, "That's because they're not lying." So
I do the same thing. If I stop to sit down, I know I'm going to fall asleep. But I love what you said about how that is like their present call to holiness. We talk to our kids about it all the time, about trust, mm-hmm. and about how we start establishing trust with little things like cleaning your room and brushing your teeth. Because if we can trust you to do those things, then we can trust you to do bigger things. Because eventually you're going to want a cell phone. Eventually you're going to want a car. Yeah. You're going to be driving. And if we can't trust you to clean your room the first time we ask, how can we trust you with a bigger responsibility later? But I like the way you phrased it about that's their vocation at this present point in their life, is to be a son or a daughter and just be, focused on being more holy in those little ways.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, because I pray for my kids' vocations. I prayed for a while. I have no idea what the Lord has in store for them, which is good. I like that journey. But it's important that the whole reason I say that too is again, trying to bring on the lens of JP2's, the human person lens here. Vocation's more of a becoming. If you think of it like that, and you're always becoming more aware of it, even when you've chosen it, right? And so I'll give you an example. When you think of your marriage, like how long have you been married? 10 years?
13 years.
13 years.
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. So when you think back to saying yes to this vocation, and I can honestly think back to this, like even with all the trials and tribulations, of course I'd say yes. And it's not a feeling. That's not even a feeling I have. It's just I have 10 souls that the Lord has called out and to change. It's just a beautiful thing. So like my son and I were driving together, and he goes, Dad, why didn't you want to become a priest? And well, I know. So when I was in college, I had this vision because I'm very competitive. I'm like, well, if I'm going all in on this Christian thing, I'm going in. I'm gonna be as poor friar as I possibly can, and I'm gonna go preach the rooftops. Sounds very Franciscan, This is me. Like I'm all in. I'm just kind of like that. So when I was discerning marriage, because now I had this thought, but then I really felt a tug that he was calling me marriage. I had to wrestle with that, like superior calling thing, and that's just me being real and transparent. And this is where it is a superior calling, only not because you're better. It's not a better superior. It is a superior calling because it's a higher call here on this earth, right? It's just higher. It's just like the CEO is not better than me. It just has a higher position. In fact, the higher position you get, the more stress it is. That's for sure. So, but I had this image of my son asking me that very question, and I had this response because the Lord wanted you to be here. So he was 9, and he said, Dad, he came down the steps. He's like, Dad, why didn't you become a priest? And I was like, oh, because the Lord wanted you. And he goes, and in my head, it was going to be so poetic. Right? He goes, oh, all right. And he just kind of walks in. But then he's 12 now. That was when he was 9. He's 12, and when we were talking, he said, so why didn't you choose to be a priest? I said, well, because the Lord called me to marriage. And he goes, thank God. And then I said, well, why? He goes, well, and he points to himself. Yeah. and I thought about it, I was like, it's true. Yeah. I mean, it is. It's like he wanted you, and that's what I mean by more becoming of your vocation. Like it's not detective work. It's like it's already placed in you, and the Lord reveals it to you as in your journey, and it's a constant yes, a day-to-day yes to that. And so that's what you want to work within your kids and your teens, and even as school teachers and things when they talk about vocation. And I remember a school invited me in to come talk about how to handle same-sex marriage. And when I went in and I was like, well, how do y'all talk about marriage? And then so when the first thing they said was, we talk about 2 adults who love each other. And then and you throw man and woman in there, and that's when it got a little uncomfortable, because I said, well, the reason it's uncomfortable is how you've defined love and mission. Like your love has a mission attached to it. It's to will the good of the other. And marriage is a call. It is a mission. It's not just romantic. In fact, I'd almost argue that if that's the only reason you're getting married, that's a problem. Like, because you're going to find trials and you're going to find tribulations. Most people will say, whatever. But the reality is, I'm not saying, well, you better feel like you don't love them. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there's a level of fecundity that requires a lot of losing yourself, and that's the beauty of it, right? So then, in this particular incident, with when it comes to choosing the vocation, and as I mentioned before, like day by day and those kinds of yes, like those are the moments when as you grow, you're like, oh yeah, okay, I totally get this now. So that's why when I think back, I mean, I know my spouse more, but I'm the more I get to know her, I'm like, man, I really didn't know her. Or
we're totally different people now than we were when we first got married.
Yeah. Like I actually put away my laundry now. I didn't do that before. She's trained me well. Do you know that is a true statement? Yeah. There is an element of like your adaptations of being trained by your wife, because every night she'll be like, you go turn on the fan, and I don't even think about it. I get up and go turn on the fan. And I'm thinking like, so one night I did an experiment. One night I was like, I'm just going to say no. See what happens.
I bet that went over like a lead balloon.
Kind of. She was more shocked. Like she was like, what's your problem?
You're like, what?
Yeah, what's your problem?
What do you mean? I want to talk a little bit about, we've talked about theology of the body off and on, and I've interviewed Bill Donahue from the Theology of the Body Institute. I've also talked to Christopher West, and I feel like there's these really prevailing misconceptions about what theology of the body is. Like before I had talked to anybody and done any research, I was like, oh, that's the sex thing. That's it's the Catholic sex talk. But after listening to you today and learning a little bit more about Rua Woods, I'm understanding that that's not necessarily true. Like, I think depending on the grade level, it kind of gets there a little bit, but it's not, it's like you said, it's more Christian anthropology. So can you tell me a little bit more about, like, what are some of the misconceptions? Like, what is Rua Woods and what is it not?
Sure. Okay, so as a ministry, we are more. Okay, let me step back for a second. There's the distinction between Christian anthropology. I would look at it like Christian anthropology is the objective teaching of the church. Right? Mm-hmm. We've always believed this. This has been from the moment that Christ became man. This has been our ethos of understanding. So just to give you some of the precepts again, that Imago Dei, image and likeness of God, body, soul, we are our bodies, body, soul unity, vocation to love, communion. Because of original sin, we distorted our relationship with God. Christ took on a flesh in order to restore it back. Eschatological hope that we will have a body in heaven. So we're going to have this shared experience in heaven. And hence, and Chris and Bill are great about talking about, like, how the sexual acts, like, you know, in its proper context, is seen as an expression of this filial love. I mean, that's how you should see it, you know? But the other part of the Christian anthropology, outside of bringing in theology of body at this point, is there's also the idea of human rights, right? That's an element of Christian anthropology, the Judeo-Christian mindset of that. There's also, there's another one evading me here. Oh, freedom and responsibility, moral responsibility. The fact that we were created, God gives us choice because of love, right? And that freedom's actually, this is one of those ones that, okay, so freedom is what people believe freedom to be, is just your ability to choose to not do something or do something. That's actually a side. Freedom's actually, we exist to be free to exist in the good. And our choices need to point us in the direct order of that good. So we need to have free will to live in that good. If we don't have free will, then we're robots, right? Right. So, but in American culture, we put that above. So that's another part of our understanding of the human person. With theology of the body, the one particular aspect what JP2 did was, if we look at the context, in 1960, was it 68 when Humanae Vitae was written? I think it was 68. The leading contention at the time was contraception and the moral teaching. And there's a lot, not to get too far into the history here, the moral teaching of the church was, from what I understood, a bit nebulous in terms of its framework. Now, you and I might not think, really, what? But actually, it's still, even I was reading the new document put out by Pope Francis, and even they talk about nuances, you know, and so it's like, well, this is kind of a problem, you know. So what ended up leading is when Paul VI, where a lot of leading theologians were thinking he was going to say it's permissible, because that's where a lot of people were going, and he said no in that document, that it was intrinsically evil. JP2 wanted to write a document to, in a sense, write a way to create a new, if you will, a new expression or a new argument for that. So what he did is in 1974, started to write the book. And apparently, I think Waldstein said that, Mikhail Waldstein, who wrote the introduction to the new translation. So I think it was from him. He said that, you know, he was writing it in front of the Eucharist, which doesn't shock me. But for 4 years, he's writing it, but then he became Pope, and then he delivered them in audiences. So that's how we got it delivered that way. But as he frameworked it, where did he go to start the argument, to frame the argument? We went to our Christian anthropology, but what he added was this idea of the experience. So this original experience, if you will. And what I mean by that is, like, what did God create us for? So there's the objective teaching that I was laying out for you in Christian anthropology. Theology of the body adds a whole phenomenological aspect to it that is just so prolific. So what I'm almost saying is, like, he lays out a vision of man in there and then applies it to the moral ethic when he's going to try to set up his argument for why contraception is inherently wrong. Because if you think about that free, total, faithful, fruitful, which is in the later sections of the theology of the body, what better moral substratum to use as a principle to guide your marital embrace or like any type of sexual activity, right? Is it free? Is it total? Is it faithful? Is it fruitful? You could even, when you want to talk to your kids about it, it's like, is this a good thing to do if you're being coerced? And, you could even use that principle, morally speaking, on how we don't treat human people, right? Mm-hmm. So Rua exists to take that teaching and see how it applies into areas that we're trying to help. So like with students, the younger they are, I think that the church document on chastity talks about it being like the age of innocence up to 0 to 11. And I would argue that they're not wrong. Yeah. But I also know that your kids have heard words, and so it's important as parents to use them as conversations and don't think of the talk as much as you think of creating an atmosphere where they talk to you. And so that's kind of what you need them to want to come talk to you. That's what the environment. So we don't. Rua's in a way what when we breath of the Christian anthropology means that theology of the body is the way in which we express how we articulate the human person into these areas. So the kindergarten to fifth grade, we use story. So how do you talk to your students about? How do you talk to your kids about when JB talks about original solitude? In essence, what he's saying there is that man's relationship to God. So he starts with man's relationship to God and it says it's not good for him to be alone. So in the progression of Scripture, in his catechesis, he starts on the idea that in the beginning it was not so, Christ's words, right, in the man and woman. So he's going to reflect on our capacity to know God in and of ourselves and how that directs us to actually, as he says, that Adam recognizes himself in the image and likeness of God, not so much also in the solitude, but also in the moment of communion. So, and that's a beautiful thing. So how do we help our kids understand what it actually means when original nakedness? So a lot of times these three original experiences could be explained and separated, but you could also see them as an integral whole. So if I'm able to actually look at a woman or a man and see their body and see their dignity, that's what I see. I see their dignity. Okay. What does it take to recognize my relationship with God? Because of the grace that. And there's one of the bishops in Poland at the time of John Paul II talks about this as original solitude as those moments of silence, right? Not absent of noise, but in contentment in relationship with God. So, but this is all part of our original echo, as he mentions. So like the theology of the body has a way for us to understand the why behind a lot of our behavior, the why we're here, why we exist. So that's its precipice. That's where it starts. Mm-hmm. And then you can take it, and he talks about marriage and sexuality, and thank God. You know what I mean? Like, thank God. It's unfortunate in a lot of ways that because of branding, not because of how the American mind works with branding, that's just what we do. Mm-hmm. Like, we associate things, we label things, we like our labels in America. Even the people who say I'm not a label create labels for themselves. Mm-hmm. We love labels. So that's what's important. But if you ever listen to Christopher West and you ever listen to them, they're such powerful speakers and they're so profound in what they know. I learn a lot from them. I mean, I absolutely do. And Rua is not in conjecture. Most of our employees right now in the ministry have in some form or another taken a class at the TOB Institute. I did 2 of them. I happen to have a master's, so I did a lot of work in it too. But I did go to a few, and it's the healing that happens when you give yourself the time to let that teaching sink in. It's absolutely amazing. And both of those. Every person that's been associated with that ministry too is they're just deeply prayerful. It's so beautiful. But for Rua, our initiative is the breath of God. Like we want the Holy Spirit to come alive in whatever culture you're trying to bring into your culture, family, schools, parishes, I said families, but even like individuals who really are trying to grapple with some real issues that they're plagued with. So we stand as a ministry that's always going to be dedicated to bringing the Holy Spirit and asking that identity, learning to be a son and daughter of God, the dignity of the human person, and then their vocation. So we just spread our horizons a little bit more, helping leaders and people bring it to their culture a little bit more. And I don't try to use Christian Anthropology and Theology of the Body interchangeably because I guess it could be confusing. But what I am saying is Theology of the Body is a vision that JP2 lays out of man. And for example, too, I failed to mention this earlier. Like when our curriculum focuses on the first 3 parts where we walk them through the human timeline. There was a TOB speaker. Her name was Jen Messing, and she's recently passed. And what a gift she was to the church. Calls it a story. She calls it a story, and it's so true. It's the human story. So we focus on the human story aspect of the beginning part of that story, where it's like, what was man's experience in the beginning? What happened when sin happens? How does redemption come in to bring us back? Or is it not even bringing us back, or is it bringing us forward? Like, that kind of conversation. I'd almost argue it's more of a bringing forward, because and then what's to come. So that's what we walk through with teachers and schools. And then as we get bigger and bigger and more resources developed, or partnering with other people, because that's also a part of what we would love to do. We want people to have access to the scholars we have on site with how does this apply to family. We do Christian Anthropology. We do talks on Theology of the Body and things of that nature, and come and do presentations. But a lot of our work is to help empower teachers and empower schools and catechists. That's a lot of our work. And then, with our psych services, they help too as well. So
I think I think building that support system around our kids who probably don't even realize that they need this big support system. I think that is incredibly important. But education doesn't solely happen like in the classroom. I feel like our job as parents and even as educators outside the classroom is to like really support our children further in determining who they are, how they fit in the world, and developing their relationship with God. And I love that story about your wife and creating that space for your children to come talk to her. What are some practical tips for us to kind of to do that in our own life? Like I don't knit, but what are some ways that we can do that and like not be afraid to broach this topic with our kids?
Yeah, that's a great. There's a lot of resources out there. Age level, age appropriate things. If you want to look at our curriculum and how you could best help, I know we've made it to where parents could do it if they were homeschooling their kids or things of that nature. There are other organizations that are trying to find ways to have conversations. It's hard to just say Google search and you'll find some, now who you trust and things of that nature. There's a lot of things you have to swim through. So don't get me wrong, but I know we need to create one at Rua's. Here's a resource list. Like here's some good resources and stuff. I don't think we have that yet. But one of the things I would say in terms of practical application, I want to create as many embodied experiences that I can for my kids. Okay. And what I've been working on as a theme is presence. Like I want to be actively present. I want to spend time with my kids. Okay. I want to know them better. Okay. All good. But the problem with that is the speed and pace of life. So when you plan your calendar, think of at the end of the week, what would I have liked to have done with my kid? And I'm speaking vague, that I would be like, oh, that was fun. Don't overbook it, because then you're going to set yourself up for failure. But with my wife, it was like, okay, I got to make sure we do some form of a date night, something that pulls her out of the home. I wouldn't take her on a date to my office, so I probably shouldn't try to take her to a date. And it doesn't have to mean spend money. It just means just get her out of the house for a little bit, right? But then for my kids, it's like, you know what? I'm going to plan my calendar with priority first. When do I pray? When am I spending my emotional time with God? My time with God. When will I spend time with my wife? And I know it sounds like, why are you putting that in your calendar? For me, I have to, because otherwise, I'll find something else to fill it. That's just my personality. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, but I just know that about myself. But then like planning when I'm going to be with my kids, and like, do I want this week, once a week, doing an activity with them that's not that I would enjoy doing with them, or they would enjoy me doing with them, and that it's an embodied activity. It's not playing video games, although that one, if you enjoy that with your kids, please do it. But that could be one. But those aren't what I mean. I mean like hiking. I mean like taking them on, your vacation's one of those things. But put that in your calendar, and then plan the rest of your week. You know what I mean? So it's like start with that, and then plan the rest of your week. So I enjoy taking them to the store. One at a time, we'll go to the store. I always budget for I'm going to spend $10 because they're going to want like candy and but that's just you know what I mean. So finding those moments when I drive, if I have to have a long meeting, and my older kids, they'll just hang in the car and we'll talk on the way. And so finding moments to where I could spend with them is just as long as they're human. And I think if you think back to the people who modeled or are influential in your life, probably spent time with you in some capacity. So it's the same thing with our kids. And those questions that'll come up, like that are hard, I don't know how to answer that. Okay, well, I'm going to find someone who does, and then follow back up. Don't forget to follow back up. They will, because they're thinking about it then, but don't forget to follow back up. I think we're moving in the right direction with a lot of the movement that the Lord's doing, not just for Rua, but even this podcast and ways in which we can reach people to really just think and kind of go through this a little bit. So, yeah. Yeah,
I love those. Just getting back to the court, get back to the dinner table and have dinner as a family.
Amen,
like that's so important, and people.
And I would tell you, like transitionally, you have to fight for eventually, because your kids get older. They get older, and the older kids model, right? So then you have to almost like make sure the younger kids know the reason they're not here is because they're in college. But like you don't lose sight of those things. Like the family rituals are so formative that I can't even begin to tell you how formative those are. I mean, it's just a family and it's chaos at mine right now. I got 6 boys now. So, and the girls, my poor wife, her adult conversations have lessened drastically. I'm kind of kicking myself there a little bit, but so.
No, I love that. Well, thank you so much for sitting down and spending the time with me. I'm really excited to learn even more about Rua Woods, and I'm really excited for my kids to start, being able to take this back to my family and do talk more about Christian anthropology.
Yeah,
so thank you so much.
You're welcome. Well, God bless you.
Thanks.
Thank you.